Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So, if you're planning a journey, right, the goal is almost always to, arrive safely.
Right, yeah. You want to get there in one piece.
Exactly. You pack your bags, you check the weather, you map out the route, and the entire point is getting from point A to point B with, as little friction as possible.
For sure. It's all about avoiding the traffic and the bad weather.
Yeah, exactly. But what if every step you take is a deliberate march toward your own execution? What if, with just absolute certainty, that your destination is the hardest, most agonizing moment of your entire life?
Wow. That changes the entire vibe of the trip.
It really does. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a very specific, incredibly intense stretch of the biblical book of Luke. We're looking at chapter 9, verse 51, all the way through chapter 19, verse 27.
Yeah, and scholars usually refer to this as the travel narrative, right?
Right. And for you listening, our mission here is to just really dig into this section.
Because the context of this particular travel, it completely changes how we hear every single word spoken on the road.
Yeah, it sets the stage for everything. So the text tells us in Luke 9:51 that Jesus, quote, steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem.
And that phrase is so important. In the original language, it implies this resolute, unflinching, almost like a physical stiffening of the jaw.
Like bracing yourself for an impact.
Exactly. He wasn't taking a vacation.
Yeah.
Going to Jerusalem meant walking right into the headquarters of the religious and, political establishment that actively wanted him dead.
Right, which is just wild when you think about it.
It is. Because, humanly speaking, if he just wanted a long, peaceful life, he should have stayed up north.
Up in Galilee, right.
Yeah, in the rural agrarian hills, it was safe there. Instead, he makes this completely voluntary choice to head straight into the center of danger.
He's literally walking toward his own death.
He is. And earlier in chapter 9, during the Transfiguration, his death was actually described using the Greek word exodos.
Wait, like the book of Exodus? Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery?
Precisely the same concept, yeah. Just elevated to a whole new level.
Oh, wow. I never put that together.
Right. The ancient writers weren't using that word by accident.
Yeah.
Jesus' impending death in Jerusalem is being framed not just as, a tragic execution,
but as an actual exit strategy.
Yes, a cosmic exit, a deliberate departure designed to lead humanity out of a much deeper kind of slavery.
So that creates this incredibly urgent, high-stakes backdrop for everything we're about to talk about.
Absolutely. Every single parable he tells, every rebuke he gives his disciples.
Every random interaction with a stranger on this dusty road.
It's all colored by the shadow of the cross. Time is incredibly short here. The stakes are literal life and death.
That dramatically shifts how we should be reading this. These aren't just like casual fireside chats.
No, not at all. This is profound wisdom being delivered on death row, essentially.
Right. So our goal for you, the listener, is to extract the practical wisdom, the moral insight, and really the life application from these ancient chapters.
Because even if you are, thousands of years removed from first century Judea, the human psychology on display here is shockingly relevant today.
It totally is. So let's look at how this intense journey actually begins, because things get hostile almost immediately, right?
Oh, right out of the gate, they have to pass through Samaria.
And from what I understand, Jews and Samaritans did not get along, at all.
To say they didn't get along is a massive understatement. It was bad.
How bad are we talking?
Well, this was a deep-seated, vitriolic, ethnic and religious hatred that went back centuries.
Wow, centuries. So where did it even start?
Okay, so after the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, this is way back in 722 BC, they deported many of the Israelites.
Right, and they brought in foreigners to settle the land.
Exactly. So the people who were left behind, they intermarried with these foreigners, and the descendants of those unions became the Samaritans.
Ah, okay. So to first century Jews, they were seen as what? Compromised.
Yeah, they were viewed as theological half-breeds, essentially, people who had compromised the faith. And the dispute was also heavily geographical.
Geographical, like where they worshipped.
Right. The Jews worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem, of course, but the Samaritans built their own rival temple on Mount Gerizim.
And didn't the Jewish forces actually destroy that Mount Gerizim temple at some point?
They absolutely did. Under the Jewish leader, John Hyrcanus, in roughly 128 BC, they marched up and burn the Samaritan temple to the ground.
Oh my gosh. So by the time Jesus is walking through this area, the resentment is just palpable.
It's thick in the air, yeah. So when the Samaritans realize Jesus is bypassing them and steadfastly heading to Jerusalem.
Right, effectively validating the Jewish side of the whole geographical dispute.
Yes, exactly. So they refuse to offer him any hospitality. They just reject him completely.
Which prompts an absolutely wild reaction from two of his core disciples, James and John.
Oh, their reaction is so intense.
It's nuts. They get rejected for essentially a hotel room, and their immediate response is to ask Jesus, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did?
Yeah, they jump straight from no vacancy to let's nuke them from orbit.
It's just so extreme. I mean, what does that say about them?
Well, it reveals how deeply ingrained the tribalism was. You have to remember, James and John were nicknamed Boanerges.
Which means sons of thunder, right?
Yes, they had this vehement, fiery zeal. In their minds, insulting their master, who was a prominent Jewish rabbi, was grounds for apocalyptic destruction.
They even cite biblical precedent for it, pointing to the Old Testament prophet Elijah calling down fire.
Right, they think they're being righteous. But Jesus immediately turns and rebukes them.
Yeah, he shuts it down fast.
He says, "You do not know what manner of spirit you are of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them."
That response has to be a total paradigm shift for the disciples.
It really is. They're expecting a militaristic, conquering king who will crush their political enemies.
Right, and Jesus is basically saying the entire operating system of his movement is fundamentally different.
Completely different.
But what throws me is that while he is incredibly gracious to these hostile Samaritans, the demands he places on the people who actually want to follow him seem borderline unreasonable.
They do seem very harsh at first glance.
Right, because as they walk, people come up and volunteer to join the movement, but they have these caveats.
Typical human excuses, yeah.
One guy says, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Another says, let me bid farewell to those who are at my house.
And Jesus hits them with these shockingly tough replies.
He tells the guy mourning his dad, let the dead bury their own dead. And to the guy wanting to say goodbye to his family, he says, no one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God.
Those responses certainly violate our modern sensibilities. I mean, without a doubt.
Totally, because in any culture, honoring your parents and going to a funeral is like a baseline moral expectation.
Absolutely. But to understand this, we really have to look at the mechanics of ancient burial practices and, the idioms of the time.
Okay, so break that down for us. What's the context here?
Well, when the man says, let me first go and bury my father, it is highly unlikely his father was currently lying dead in the house.
Oh, really? Why is that?
If he were, the son wouldn't be out on the road listening to a traveling rabbi in the first place. He would be immersed in the intense, immediate mourning rituals.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the dad isn't dead yet, what is he actually asking?
It was a really common Middle Eastern idiom. It essentially meant, let me stay home, fulfill my familial duties, wait until my aging father eventually passes away.
Right. Settle the estate, get my inheritance.
Yes, exactly. And then I'll be free of my societal obligations to follow you.
He was basically asking for a massive deferment.
Like, check back with me in a decade. Right. And furthermore, even if the father had just died, Jewish burial involved two very distinct stages.
Oh, I've heard about this. There was the initial burial, right?
Yes. First, burying the body in a tomb. Then, a whole year later, once the flesh had decomposed, the family would return to gather the bones.
And put them in one of those bone boxes.
An ossuary, yes. It was a prolonged, socially consuming process.
Wow. Okay, so Jesus isn't just being needlessly cruel to a grieving son.
No, he's challenging the deeply ingrained human tendency to delay life's ultimate purpose for seemingly necessary but distracting societal expectations.
So when he says, let the dead bury their dead, he's essentially saying, let the spiritually dead handle these lengthy societal obligations. You have a kingdom to build right now.
That's it, exactly.
I mean, that still stings, but it makes way more sense. However, it escalates even further in chapter 14.
It does. It gets much more intense.
Yeah, Jesus turns to the massive crowds following him and drops just an absolute bombshell. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple.
It's a shocking statement.
Let me just push back hard on this. Because if any modern movement, religious or secular, tells you that step one is hate your kids and cut off your family, that is a cult, period.
Oh, 100%.
We would tell people to run for the hills. So how is this enduring wisdom?
Well, if you read it through a purely literal 21st century Western lens, you would be absolutely right to run away.
Okay, so what's the non-literal lens here?
In ancient Near Eastern languages, specifically Aramaic and Hebrew, the word that gets translated as hate was frequently used as a hyperbolic idiom.
A figure of speech.
Exactly. It was used to express relative priority, not emotional malice or actual hatred.
Like you have to love the primary mission so intensely that your love for everything else looks like hate by comparison.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. It means to love less. We see this throughout ancient texts.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, in the Old Testament, it says, God loved Jacob and hated Esau. That didn't mean God despised Esau emotionally. It meant he chose Jacob as the primary vehicle for his covenant.
Ah, I see. So it's about preference and priority.
Right. Jesus is using shocking, provocative language on purpose to shake the crowd awake. Because at this point, large crowds are following him just because he heals the sick and multiplies food.
It's popular to follow him right now. It's trendy.
Exactly. But he turns around and tells them, you need to count the cost.
And he uses those two very mechanical parables to explain counting the cost, right?
Yes, the builder and the king.
Right. The man building a tower who has to sit down and calculate if he has enough money to finish the foundation. Otherwise, everyone will just mock him.
And the king who has to consult his generals to see if his 10,000 troops can actually defeat an advancing army of 20,000.
So what's the core mechanism of those parables?
The mechanism is vital here. Both the builder and the king have to realistically assess the capital, whether financial or military required for the undertaking.
They can't just wing it.
No, you can't wing it. Jesus is saying, following me isn't a casual hobby. It will cost you your social standing, your comfort, and maybe even your life.
Because he's heading to his own execution.
Right. If your attachment to your family's approval or your cultural traditions is stronger than your commitment to the truth, you will inevitably abandon this journey when things get dangerous.
That brings us back to the guy with the plow.
Exactly. You can't put your hand to a plow, which requires looking straight ahead, focusing on a single point on the horizon just to make the furrow straight.
While constantly looking backward over your shoulder, you'll ruin the whole field.
You'll drift completely off course.
You know, that analogy of the plow hits incredible close to home for the modern listener.
It really does.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because in the 21st century, we might not be dealing with agricultural plows or first century burial rites, but we suffer deeply from the illusion of later.
Oh, the illusion of later. That is so true.
Right. We tell ourselves we'll pursue our true calling, or we'll really engage with our deep spiritual life after we finish our degree, or after the kids are grown and out of the house.
Or after we retire and have a solid nest egg.
Exactly. We are always looking back at the house, waving goodbye, asking for a deferment. We're waiting for the perfect, frictionless time to commit to our deepest values.
And the tragedy is that the frictionless time literally never arrives. By waiting for all your earthly obligations to neatly resolve themselves, you just end up wasting your life in a state of perpetual delay.
So for you listening to this right now, maybe you're on your commute or while doing the dishes, here's a moment for reflection.
Think about your own life.
Yeah. Where are you putting your hand to the plow but constantly looking backward? What is your version of let me first bury my father?
It's a tough question.
It is. And for your practice this week, I want you to identify one area of your life where you are delaying a core commitment because of comfortable, socially acceptable distractions. And take one decisive step forward today. Do not wait for later.
It is a heavy challenge to start the journey, but it naturally forces the next question, I think.
Which is?
Well, if following this path requires such a radical, singular, undistracted focus, what does the actual day-to-day practice of that commitment look like?
Right, like practically speaking.
Yeah. If we're not supposed to be beholden to societal norms, how do we treat the people right in front of us?
That is the perfect pivot, because the text leads directly into one of the most famous stories in human history found in Luke 10.
The Good Samaritan.
Yes. Redefining the other through the Good Samaritan. And it starts with a legal dispute, right?
He does. A religious lawyer, an expert in the Torah, stands up to test Jesus.
And he asks a very specific question.
He asks, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus, employing a classic rabbinic technique, answers a question with a question.
What is written in the law? What is your reading of it?
Exactly. And the lawyer gives the flawless orthodox answer. He quotes Deuteronomy and Leviticus. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself.
He nails it. And Jesus affirms him. He says, "You have answered rightly. Do this, and you will live."
But the lawyer just can't leave it there.
No, he can't. The text gives us this brilliant psychological insight. It says he wanted to, quote, justify himself.
Right. So he asked the million-dollar follow-up question.
And who is my neighbor?
Yes.
Let's just pause and analyze human nature here for a second. Why ask that?
Because he's looking for a boundary line.
Exactly. He wants a checklist. Because if he can strictly define who his neighbor is, he simultaneously defines who his neighbor is not.
He wants the theological loophole that gives him permission to ignore certain people.
We all want the loophole. It is so much easier to love humanity in the abstract than to love the specific, annoying, or culturally foreign person standing right in front of us.
Absolutely, and Jesus knows this. So instead of giving a theological treatise or a legal definition, he tells a story.
He sets the scene.
He says a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead.
And the geography here is not incidental, is it?
Not at all. The road from Jerusalem to Jericho was infamous.
How bad was it?
It was notoriously dangerous. Jerusalem was up in the mountains, about 2,500 feet above sea level. Jericho is down near the Dead Sea, which is roughly 800 feet below sea level.
Oh, wow. So it's a massive drop.
Yes. In just 18 miles, the road drops over 3,300 feet. It was this steep, winding, rocky descent through desolate desert terrain.
Perfect for ambushes.
Completely. It was full of limestone caves that provided perfect hiding spots for highwaymen. Historically, it was actually known as the Pass of Blood. You did not linger on this road.
Okay, so we have this man bleeding out in the dirt on this terrifying road, and Jesus says a priest happens to be going down that road.
A priest, the height of religious morality, theoretically.
Right. He sees the dying man, but he crosses over and passes by on the other side.
And then a Levite, another member of the religious elite, comes to the place, looks at the man, and also passes by on the other side.
My question is why? Are they just sadists? Do they just not care?
It's actually worse, in a way. They are rule followers.
What do you mean?
As priests and Levites, they were bound by strict Old Testament purity laws. According to Numbers 19, if you touched a corpse, you were ritually unclean for 7 days.
Oh, I see.
You couldn't participate in temple duties. You'd lose your shift, your status, and the community's respect until you went through this whole complex purification process.
And the text says the man is half dead.
Right. They don't know if he's already a corpse or about to become one. Stopping to check would risk their ritual purity.
So they allowed their rigid adherence to religious logistics to completely override the spirit of the law, which is compassion.
Precisely. They chose purity over empathy.
You know, I often think of this in modern terms to try and grasp the weight of it.
What's your analogy?
Imagine a deeply important person. Maybe the keynote speaker at a massive charity gala, or a megachurch pastor rushing to deliver a sermon on love.
Okay, I can picture that.
They are driving down the highway in a tuxedo or a pristine suit, and they see a horrific car crash. A victim is bleeding on the shoulder.
Right.
But the speaker thinks, I can't stop. I'll get blood all over my suit. I'll miss my speaking slot. I have 5,000 people waiting for my holy wisdom. I'll just call 911 from the car and let someone else get their hands dirty.
Wow. That hits hard.
They prioritize their structured, clean obligations over the messy, catastrophic human need right in front of them.
That modern analogy captures the exact tension the original audience would have felt. Now, structurally, the Jewish audience listening to this parable would have expectations.
Like a rule of threes.
Exactly. They would expect the third person coming down the road to be a regular Israelite layman, a regular Joe.
Right, because the priest failed, the Levite failed, so the common Jewish man will be the hero.
Right. It would be a satisfying anti-clerical morality tale. But Jesus introduces a twist designed to genuinely offend them.
He makes the hero a Samaritan.
A Samaritan. The very group that, just one chapter prior, James and John wanted to incinerate with heavenly fire. The group viewed as heretics and enemies.
The ultimate other.
Yes. Yet it is the Samaritan who sees the Jewish man and is moved with compassion. And he doesn't just feel bad. He takes dangerous, costly action.
He stops in a bandit-infested pass.
He uses his own oil and wine to act as an antiseptic on the wounds, oil to soothe the skin.
And he puts the bleeding man on his own animal, meaning the Samaritan now has to walk through this dangerous pass.
He takes him to an inn, and he pays the innkeeper 2 denarii.
Remind us, what is the economic weight of 2 denarii in that culture?
1 denarius was roughly the standard daily wage for a laborer. But in terms of purchasing power, 2 denarii could pay for a man's room and board at an inn for up to 2 months.
2 months. That is a massive, tangible investment.
It is. And he tells the innkeeper, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, when I come again, I will repay you. He effectively gives a blank check to a stranger of a rival ethnicity.
This story is profoundly uncomfortable if we actually let it land.
It's meant to be.
Because we naturally resist this today just as much as the lawyer did. I mean, we prefer our echo chambers. We prefer tribalism.
It's safer that way.
Right. We want our empathy to have a hard boundary line drawn right down the middle of our political, social, or religious ideologies. We want to believe that we only owe basic decency to the people who think and vote exactly like we do.
But Jesus utterly obliterates that boundary. Notice how he flips the lawyer's original question.
The lawyer asks, who is my neighbor, wanting to know who qualifies for his care.
Right. But at the end of the story, Jesus asks, so which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the thieves?
He shifts the entire moral framework.
He changes it from who meets my criteria to be loved to what kind of person am I being to the people in my path.
And the lawyer's bias is so deep, he can't even bring himself to say the word Samaritan in his answer.
I know. He just mutters, he who showed mercy on him.
The prejudice was just suffocating.
It was. And Jesus simply says, go and do likewise.
True neighborliness crosses sociopolitical and cultural boundaries at a high personal cost.
According to this text, your neighbor isn't just the person who looks like you. Your neighbor is anyone in your path who is in need, especially the one you have been culturally conditioned to despise.
So for you listening, here's the practical question for this insight. We all have a Samaritan in our lives.
Everyone does.
It might be a political group, a social demographic, or a specific coworker you fundamentally disagree with. The question is, who is the Samaritan in your life?
And the practice. How can you show active, costly compassion to them this week? Not just tolerating them from a safe distance, but actively crossing the road to bind up a wound. That requires immense action. It's tough.
It really is.
But, if the Good Samaritan is a mandate for extreme, active, external doing, we run into a fascinating tension.
Oh, because of what comes next.
Yes, because the very next story in Luke's narrative serves as a warning against being consumed by doing at the expense of being.
I am so glad we are going here, because if the takeaway from the Samaritan is just do more, work harder, fix everyone, we will literally burn out in a week.
Exactly. You can't sustain that constantly without an internal anchor.
That brings us to our next major theme, the tyranny of the urgent and the illusion of security, spanning the end of chapter 10 and chapter 12. And it starts with a domestic dispute between 2 sisters.
Martha and Mary.
Right. Jesus enters a village and is welcomed into the home of a woman named Martha, and Martha has a sister named Mary.
And Mary sits at Jesus' feet, listening to his teaching.
But Martha, the text says, is cumbered about much serving.
Yes, the Greek word there, perispato, means to be dragged away, overoccupied, or pulled in different directions. She gets frustrated, storms in, and demands, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore, tell her to help me.
Okay, I have to pause here and advocate for Martha.
I figured you might.
I have major oldest sibling energy, and someone has to actually cook the dinner. If Mary just sits there contemplating the universe, 20 hungry men in the living room are going to starve.
That's a fair point.
Martha gets a terrible reputation in historical interpretations, but isn't Jesus being a bit unfair to the person trying to keep the logistics running?
It is entirely fair to defend Martha's work ethic. Scholars like Matthew Henry note that Martha's desire to serve her guests was noble and commendable. Jesus is not giving an anti-work manifesto.
Okay, good. So what's the actual problem?
The problem isn't the cooking. The problem is her internal state. Listen to Jesus' gentle but firm response. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, which will not be taken away from her.
So it's the anxiety.
Yes. The issue is that Martha was anxious and troubled. The Greek implies a noisy, turbulent state of mind. She let the logistics of the moment destroy her presence in the moment.
I see. So it's the internal distraction. She's physically there, but mentally she's in the kitchen agonizing over the roast.
Exactly. If we connect this to modern mindfulness or Eastern philosophies regarding presence, there is a universal human struggle here.
Living in the future.
Right. Martha was living entirely in the future. She was stressed about the next course, the timeline, the presentation. Mary was fully in the now.
Jesus is saying that living so obsessively in future logistics causes you to completely miss the divine reality sitting right in your living room.
Mary recognized that the eternal was present, and she stopped producing so she could just be.
That perfectly frames the danger of future obsession, which is the exact theme Jesus tackles a few chapters later in Luke 12.
Right, the inheritance dispute.
Yeah, he is teaching a massive crowd, and suddenly a guy shouts out, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Like mid-sermon.
Jesus immediately refuses to be their estate arbitrator. Instead, he addresses the root cause of the interruption.
Which is greed.
Right. He says, "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." And then he tells the parable of the rich fool.
This parable is just devastating. A rich man's ground yields an enormous, unprecedented harvest. He has so much grain, he literally doesn't know what to do with it.
A good problem to have, usually.
Right. So he thinks to himself, what shall I do? I have no room to store my crops, I know. I will pull down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.
But God intervenes.
Yeah, God says to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you, then whose will those things be which you have provided?
We have to understand the mechanics of the ancient agrarian economy to see why this man is explicitly called a fool.
Because saving for the future doesn't seem foolish on the surface.
No, but in that society, wealth was largely a zero-sum game based on limited land and crop yields. To build bigger barns, to hoard a massive surplus, meant keeping food off the market.
Driving up prices.
Exactly. He was essentially enriching himself while his neighbors starved. He wasn't just saving for retirement, he was economically exploiting the community.
And beyond the economics, the psychological trap he falls into is terrifying. Notice his pronouns.
The I and my.
Yes! What shall I do? I have no room. I will build bigger barns. I will say to my soul. He is entirely isolated.
He has no friends, no community, no gratitude to God. He is just having a conversation with his own soul surrounded by piles of wheat.
It is the ultimate picture of the illusion of security.
He believed that if he could just amass enough physical resources, he could build an impenetrable fortress against the chaos, unpredictability, and mortality of the world.
I have goods laid up for many years.
Right. He was living entirely in a projected future. But God tells him he doesn't even have hours. His soul's required of him that very night. Death renders all of his anxious hoarding completely absurd.
This hits the modern listener right between the eyes.
Because we are doing the exact same thing.
Yes, because we live in a relentless hustle culture. We are a society of barn builders.
We glorify accumulation and constant motion.
We build bigger barns today, larger 401ks, massive investment portfolios, huge houses, sprawling real estate empires. And why do we do it? Because we think it will buy us peace.
We think it's a security blanket.
But Jesus follows up this parable by pointing to nature. He says, look at the ravens. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't have storehouses or barns, and yet God feeds them.
Look at the lilies. They don't toil or spin, yet Solomon in all his royal glory wasn't dressed as beautifully as a wildflower.
He is exposing the tyranny of the urgent. The anxiety over food, clothes, and retirement portfolios robs us of life.
It's an idolatry of accumulation that distracts us from the kingdom of God.
So if you are listening to this right now, especially if you consider yourself a highly driven, productive person, think about your own calendar.
Look at where your energy goes.
Yeah. Where are you building bigger barns in your mind? Where are you telling yourself that you will start actually living, relaxing, or connecting with your family after you get the next promotion or hit a specific financial milestone?
It's that illusion of later again.
Exactly. Here is your practical how-to for this insight. The practice is simple, but for a barn builder, it might be the hardest thing you do all week.
What is it?
Schedule 15 minutes of Mary time.
I love that. Just 15 minutes to break the cycle.
Exactly. Sit in silence. No screens, no deep dive discussions, sorry. No producing anything, no planning your grocery list or your next meeting. Just practice present.
Exist in the now and remind your soul that your worth is not tied to your productivity and your security does not come from your barns.
That is a crucial challenge, but it does raise a complex logistical question.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if we are supposed to let go of our tight grip on our productivity and we recognize that hoarding wealth, like the rich fool, is a spiritual death sentence, how should we view our money and resources?
Right. If wealth is dangerous, what are we supposed to do with it? Just throw it away.
Exactly. That perfectly transitions us into our next major theme, The Economy of Radical Grace and Shrewdness, covering Luke 15 and 16.
These chapters contain Jesus' most famous parables about value.
And easily his most confusing parable about money. But let's set the stage with chapter 15 first. The religious elites are offended again.
Yes, the Pharisees and scribes are murmuring.
So, to understand their anger, we need to define who the Pharisees were, right?
We do. They were a sect of Judaism intensely focused on ritual purity and strict adherence to the law. Their name literally means the separated ones.
Separated from what?
From impurity. They believed you remained holy by quarantining yourself away from anything or anyone impure.
Okay. And here is Jesus, a rabbi, eating with tax collectors and sinners.
Right. And in ancient Middle Eastern culture, to share a meal with someone was to extend deep fellowship, peace, and acceptance. To the Pharisees, this was scandalous contamination.
So Jesus responds to their murmuring by telling 3 back-to-back parables about lost things.
The sheep, the coin, and the sun.
Right. A shepherd leaves 99 sheep in the open country to hunt down 1 lost sheep. A woman loses one of her 10 silver coins, sweeps the entire house until she finds it, and throws a party.
And then the masterpiece. The prodigal son.
A father has 2 sons. The younger son demands his share of the estate early.
Which, in that patriarchal culture, was an unthinkable insult. He was essentially saying, "Old man, I wish you were dead. Give me your money."
That is brutal. So he takes the money, goes to a distant country, squanders the wealth on reckless living, and a famine hits.
He ends up feeding pigs.
Which is significant for a Jewish boy.
Right. It's the ultimate symbol of degradation. Pigs were ritually unclean. He is starving, so he rehearses a speech to go back and beg his father just to hire him as a servant.
But the father's reaction breaks every cultural rule.
It truly does. The text says that while the son was still a long way off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran to him.
Why is the running such a big deal?
A wealthy, elderly Middle Eastern patriarch in flowing robes did not run. It was considered undignified and shameful to expose your legs and sprint.
But the father absorbs the shame.
He does. He embraces him, interrupts the rehearsed apology, and orders his servants to bring the best robe, a ring for his finger, and sandals for his feet.
Fully restoring him to sonship.
Yes, and he throws a massive feast.
It is the ultimate picture of unearned grace. But Jesus doesn't end the story there. He introduces a major obstacle to this grace. The older brother.
And the older brother was out in the field working.
Right. He hears the music, finds out his disgraced brother's back, and he refuses to go into the house. He is furious.
He tells his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him."
The older brother basically represents the Pharisees.
He perfectly embodies their meritocratic worldview. He believes in a strict transactional economy. I follow the rules, I work hard, therefore you owe me a reward.
My brother broke the rules, therefore he deserves to be punished.
Exactly.
I always try to think of a modern analogy for the older brother.
What comes to mind?
Imagine you are grinding at a corporate firm. You work there for 10 years, you never take a sick day, you work weekends, you do everything perfectly.
The model employee.
Right. Then the CEO hires a guy who literally flunked out of his last 3 jobs, embezzled money, and has a terrible reputation.
A total disaster.
Yeah, but the CEO instantly gives this new guy the corner office, a massive salary, and a company car. The visceral anger and injustice you would feel that is the older brother.
Our modern culture absolutely hates the idea of unearned grace.
We do. We want karma. We want the scorecard to matter.
But God's economy of grace flips our human sense of fairness entirely upside down.
The father pleads with the older brother, saying, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive."
The older brother was keeping a meticulous ledger of his good deeds. But the father's love isn't an accounting trick.
Speaking of accounting tricks.
Oh boy, here we go.
That leads us directly into chapter 16 and the parable of the unjust steward. I'm going to need you to unpack this because on the surface, it makes 0 sense.
It is definitely one of the hardest parables to interpret.
Jesus tells a story about a manager who is caught wasting his rich boss's assets. The boss says, "Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager."
The guy is fired.
Right. So to save his own skin, he calls in his boss's debtors. He says to the first, "How much do you owe?" The guy says, 100 measures of oil. The manager says, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50."
He slashes the debt in half.
Yeah. He does this with wheat, too, slashing debts across the board. He does this so that when he is out on the street, these debtors will owe him a favor and let him sleep on their couches.
It sounds like pure corporate fraud.
Exactly. He is embezzling on his way out the door. But the crazy part is the end of the story. The master finds out and commends the dishonest manager for acting shrewdly.
And Jesus seems to agree.
Right. Jesus says, "For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light." Why on earth is Jesus praising a white-collar criminal?
This is where we desperately need historical context to understand the mechanics of ancient debt ledgers.
Please shed some light on this.
So, there are a few ways scholars interpret what the steward was actually doing. In the Roman farming system or estate management, a steward often inflated the debts to include his own massive commission or usurious interest.
Which was actually against Jewish law, right?
Exactly. So by slashing the bills from 100 to 50, he might have simply been removing his own cut.
Oh, I see.
Alternatively, he was generously forgiving the debts on the master's behalf, making the master look incredibly merciful to the community.
Which traps the master.
Yes. The master couldn't reverse the action without looking like a tyrant, so he has to laugh and commend the guy's brilliance.
Okay, that makes way more sense contextually. But what is the actual lesson for the listener?
The lesson is absolutely not to steal. The lesson is about the steward's foresight regarding his resources.
Jesus calls earthly wealth unrighteous mammon, right?
Right. Mammon was an Aramaic term for wealth or property. The steward realized a fundamental truth. His current access to resources was strictly temporary.
Because he was about to be evicted from his position.
Yes. So instead of hoarding what he couldn't keep, he aggressively leveraged those temporary resources to secure future relationships and a future home.
He knew he couldn't take the money with him, so he converted the money into friendships.
Precisely. And Jesus draws this devastating conclusion. He says, secular worldly people are often highly strategic, forward-thinking, and shrewd about their temporary earthly futures.
But spiritual people, the sons of light, are often incredibly passive, naive, and foolish regarding eternity.
The modern translation of this is mind-blowing. Wealth is just a tool. It is not a security blanket, like the rich fool thought. It is a temporary resource that is just passing through your hands.
Jesus says, "Make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings."
Don't hoard your money. Leverage it.
Use your wealth, your influence, your business network to build communities, to lift up the poor, to create lasting good. You convert the temporary currency into eternal value.
It is brilliant economics. But giving away our resources and showing radical generosity brings us right back to the obstacle of the older brother.
Because we resent giving to people who haven't earned it.
Exactly. We want to hold on to our mammon.
So, listeners, it's time to check your own internal ledger. Here's the reflection for this insight. Are you operating like the older brother? Are you keeping a spiritual or moral scorecard of your own goodness, secretly resenting others who get a second chance?
That's a tough mirror to look into.
It is, and the practice, based on the unjust steward, how can you aggressively leverage your temporary resources this week to make friends rather than build barns?
Buy a meal for someone who can't pay you back. Donate to a cause that helps the marginalized. Convert your temporary mammon into lasting impact. That is a profound paradigm shift. But it leads us to our final culminating question.
Which is?
Well, if you realize that you are the lost sheep, if you realize that you are the prodigal son who has been welcomed back with unearned grace, what happens next?
How does a person respond to being the recipient of that grace?
Right. What does your life look like afterward?
That brings us to our final theme, entitlement versus transformation, looking at chapters 17, 18, and 19. And we see a stark spectrum of how human beings respond to the gifts they are given.
Let's start with Luke 17 and the 10 lepers.
Okay, so Jesus is entering a village, and 10 men with leprosy stand afar off.
We have to understand the absolute horror of leprosy in the ancient world. It wasn't just a physical disease that destroyed your nerve endings and disfigured your body. It was social and religious death.
Because of the Levitical laws.
Yes, according to Levitical law, a leper had to wear torn clothes, leave their hair unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and literally cry out, "Unclean, unclean," wherever they walked.
That is heartbreaking.
They were exiled from their families, their jobs, and the temple. They lived in isolated colonies. So these 10 men, standing far away to avoid contaminating Jesus, cry out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us."
And Jesus doesn't touch them. He just issues a command. He says, "Go and show yourselves to the priests."
That was the legal protocol. If a leper ever experienced a remission of symptoms, the priest had to declare them clean before they could re-enter society.
And the text says that as they went, they were cleansed. The flesh was restored.
A total miracle.
But out of the 10, only one turns back. When he sees he is healed, he returns, glorifying God with a loud voice, and falls on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks.
And Luke adds a critical detail. He was a Samaritan.
Another Samaritan.
Jesus asks a haunting question. Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?
It is a tragic, penetrating picture of human entitlement.
The 9 were desperate for the healing, but they had absolutely no gratitude for the healer.
They got their physical problem solved, they got their lives back, and they simply moved on. The grace they received didn't transform their hearts. It merely improved their circumstances.
Entitlement kills gratitude. They felt they were owed the healing somehow.
But contrast that entitlement with the ultimate story of transformation found in Luke 19, the story of Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus is one of the most fascinating characters in the entire travel narrative. He's a chief tax collector in the city of Jericho, and the text explicitly states he was rich.
Now, to understand why the crowd hates him, we must understand the Roman tax farming system, the publicani.
Right. Because today, nobody loves the IRS, but we don't view them as moral monsters. It was different back then.
Entirely different. The Roman Empire would auction off the right to collect taxes in a specific region.
So a chief tax collector like Zacchaeus would pay Rome a fixed sum up front.
Right. Then he was given the authority, backed by Roman soldiers, to extort whatever he wanted from the local populace to recoup his investment and make a massive profit.
To the Jewish people, Zacchaeus wasn't just a bureaucrat. He was a traitor.
He was collaborating with the pagan occupying force and bleeding his own countrymen dry to build his personal fortune.
He was a wealthy extortionist, and he is physically short.
Right. Jesus is passing through Jericho, massive crowds are swarming him, and Zacchaeus can't see over the crowd.
So this wealthy, powerful, despised chief tax collector runs ahead and climbs a sycamore tree just to get a glimpse of the rabbi.
Which is incredible because wealthy men in the ancient Near East did not climb trees. It was utterly undignified.
He abandons his dignity out of curiosity or desperation. And as Jesus passes by, he stops, looks up into the branches and says, "Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house."
The crowd loses its mind. They complain, saying, "He has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner."
They are furious that Jesus is extending the fellowship of a meal to the worst guy in town.
But look at Zacchaeus' response to this completely unearned, scandalous grace. He doesn't just say, "Thank you, pass the bread."
No, he stands up and declares to the Lord, "Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold."
The specifics of his restitution are astounding. Under the Jewish law of the Torah, if you extorted someone but voluntarily confessed, you only had to pay back the principal plus 20%.
Paying fourfold was the harsh Roman penalty imposed on a convicted, unrepentant rustler or thief.
Zacchaeus isn't required to do this. He is voluntarily subjecting himself to the most punitive, extreme measure of the law to make things right. He liquidates his corrupt empire on the spot.
It is the exact opposite of the rich young ruler we see back in chapter 18.
Oh, that's a great contrast. That guy came to Jesus, claimed he followed all the religious rules, but when Jesus told him to sell his possessions and give to the poor, the ruler walked away depressed because he loved his money.
Zacchaeus didn't even ask what to do, and Jesus didn't demand his money. But the collision with radical grace instantly hits Zacchaeus' wallet.
It produced spontaneous, terrifyingly expensive generosity. Jesus looks at this economic transformation and declares, "Today salvation has come to this house."
Because true, internal transformation always manifests in the external, material reality of our lives. Grace requires stewardship.
Which Jesus highlights in the final parable of this section, the parable of the minas in Luke 19.
A nobleman goes to a distant country to receive a kingdom. He calls 10 of his servants and gives them each 1 mina, about 3 months' wages, and says, "Do business till I come."
When the nobleman returns, he audits them. The first servant leveraged the mina and made 10 more. He is rewarded with authority over 10 cities.
The second made 5 and gets 5 cities.
But then a third servant approaches. He says, "Master, here is your mina. which I kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you, because you are an austere man. You collect what you did not deposit and reap what you did not sow.
The master condemns him, using his own logic. He says, if you really believed I was a harsh, demanding capitalist, you should have at least put the money in the bank to earn baseline interest.
But you didn't. You hid it.
The servant's problem was a distorted, paralyzing fear of the master. He viewed his master not as a giver of opportunity, but as a tyrant looking for an excuse to punish him.
That fear made him utterly useless. He buried the gift he was given.
If we pull the modern translation out of these three stories, we see the anatomy of how we respond to the gifts, the grace, and the resources in our lives.
The 9 lepers show us that entitlement kills gratitude. They took the healing and vanished.
The servant with the minas shows us that a distorted fear paralyzes us. He buried his potential.
But Zacchaeus shows us what actual grace looks like when it takes root. It produces joyful gratitude that results in radical, active economic restitution.
Zacchaeus didn't just feel bad about his past. He didn't just write a sad journal entry.
He made it right, at massive personal cost.
He transitioned from being a consumer of blessings to being a transformed steward.
And that leads to our final and perhaps most difficult practical how-to for you listening. We are calling this the Zacchaeus audit.
Oh, this is a heavy one.
Take a hard, honest look at your life, your business dealings, and your relationships. Is there anyone you have wronged, defrauded, or taken advantage of?
Have you cut corners, underpaid someone, or profited unfairly at someone else's expense?
The practice this week is to make literal active restitution. Do not just send a text saying, my bad. Do not just apologize in the abstract. Go make it right. Pay the money back. Fix the mistake.
That is the proof that the grace and wisdom you are seeking has actually traveled from your head to your hands.
As we step back and look at the entire arc of this travel narrative, this intense journey toward Jerusalem, a profound and subversive pattern emerges.
Think about the cast of characters we've discussed today. The Good Samaritan, the woman searching for the coin, the prodigal son feeding pigs,
The one grateful leper who returned, the despised tax collector in the sycamore tree.
the people who actually get it, the ones who recognize their need, drop their defenses, and experience true transformation are consistently the outsiders.
The outcasts, the marginalized,
It's incredible. And the ones who consistently miss it.
the priest, the Levite, the older brother, the rich fool, the Pharisees.
Exactly. The ones who are blind to the truth, who stand outside the party with their arms crossed in resentment, are the religious insiders, the wealthy, the people who think they have perfectly followed the rules.
The entire narrative is a warning against spiritual pride and the illusion of self-sufficiency.
It leaves us with a deeply provocative question to ponder on our own journeys. As you look at the story of your own life, your own money, and your own interactions with the other, are you absolutely sure you know which character you're playing?
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.